It's Wednesday, December 18th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me to do just that is Sal Vetri. Sal, what's going on, buddy?
Not much. I'm feeling good a week before some holiday season. I think half of my home leagues were into the semifinals. The only league where I could have been eligible for the toilet bowl, we got out of that bracket this week. So right now, we're just kind of playing with house money. We're trying to take home some championships. I think a lot of listeners are as well. So it's crunch time this week, right? It's crunch time semifinals, trying to get to the dance. This is it.
Yeah, I think I made it through in all my leagues last night, except a league in the Reception Perception Dynasty League. I lost by 3 points thanks to my Caleb Williams, Sam Darnold Superflex pairing there. No, I mean, listen, Justin Jefferson, catch that pass, walk in the end zone, buddy. We're going to the next round of the dance. Not great.
Man, so you had to watch that whole game.
Oh, I mean, dude, I had to do a recap on this podcast about both of those games, Sal. Both of those games. But you know what? As Don Draper would say, that's what the money's for. That is what the money's for. So, hey, we will take it. Could be working on the railroad or something like that. Instead, we're talking football here with Sal Vetri, and it's a good time to be alive. Although, Sal, on a down note, more details to come next 2 weeks, listeners, for Christmas and New Year's and sort of our schedule. But this is the last data dump of the season, man. So, with Christmas, obviously, next week, we're not going to be taping a data dump podcast. We're going to switch up the holiday schedule a little bit. So I hope to get you back on for some episodes down the line, buddy, but it's been a hell of a ride this year.
Yeah, it really has been. I mean, it goes quick. Like, you put your head down, you do a bunch of work for 16 weeks and you look up and the season's already over, but it's been great. It's been a great addition to my schedule to chop it up and hope we could do it moving forward.
Absolutely. I would love to do that. So how things are going to go, again, more details to kind of come out, but we are going to be dropping pods on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday of Christmas and New Year's. So we want to make sure you're prepared for your fantasy title weeks while you also enjoy the holidays. And plus, after week 17, I mean, come on, let's not be playing your fantasy championships in week 18, as we know. But for now, let's get into the week 16 data dump.
Yes, science!
My calculations are correct. You're going to see some serious...
Reminder, Sal gives 5 stats. I give 5 stats. Our fifth and final stat is a secret stat. Very much looking forward to see if Sal can guess mine this week. All right, Sal, give me your first note that people need to know heading into week 16.
Yeah, I think we have like a pick up and play candidate here, which is pretty rare for week 16 that you can just grab someone on the waivers and put them into your starting lineup. But Brenton Strange for the Jacksonville Jaguars, a tight end, a position where if you don't have one of the top 4 or 5 guys this year, you probably could use somebody on the waiver wire if they've been producing. And that's been the case with Strange. So Evan Ingram was ruled out for the season. He had shoulder surgery entering week 15. We had 4 other games this year where Strange got to be the starting tight end for this team when Ingram was battling a hamstring injury earlier this season. And he didn't have any insane performances during that time, but due to the state of the tight end position early on this year, he did have 3 top 10 finishes in those 4 starts. He also saw extended usage in 2 tight end sets, even as a wide receiver at times, middle of the season when Christian Kirk went down with injury. They were utilizing him in the middle of the field as a slot receiver. This is a second-year tight end, a second-round pick that kind of went under the radar last year because they already had Evan Ingram on the team. He goes out and leads the NFL in receptions at the tight end position last year. So really no noise or any reason to discuss Brenton Strange. But every time he's had opportunities this year, he's filled in. I think he's looked good. And this past week in week 15, we got to see him start his first game with Mac Jones at quarterback. And it was kind of a nice combination here. Like, short passing is what Mac Jones is going to be better at than downfield consistent throws. And that's where Brenton Strange was operating in the middle of the field, very similar to Evan Ingram being motioned at times. He caught 11 balls on 12 targets. I think only 5 other tight ends this year have earned at least 12 targets in a game. So that's some nice company for Strange. And this past week, he finished once again as a top 10 tight end on the week. He's now done that in 4 to 5 starts. And if you're in a bind, if you don't have Trey McBride, if you don't have Jonnu Smith at this point or Travis Kelce, there's a decent chance that Strange, who's going to push towards being a top 10 or top 12 tight end in my rankings this week, is appealing to. He faces the Raiders. They are arguably one of the worst teams against tight ends this year. Everything adds up for Strange. I think it's rare to find any position outside of defense this late in the season that you could plug and play in your lineup. And I think he kind of fits the bill here.
Yeah, and with Brian Thomas Jr. operating as, I mean, no one really plays like exclusively one position, but he's obviously the guy that is, would take most of the snaps at X receiver now at this point, especially with Gabe Davis not there. Parker Washington, I thought was kind of like a slot only prospect, but again, with all of the injuries they have right now, they've mostly used him as an outside receiver. In this last week 15 game, he was in the slot on only 32.3% of the snaps. Devin Duvernay was actually the leading slot receiver at 77%, but with Evan Ingram out, he has Brenton Strange has been not just the tight end, but he's also been the slot receiver too. 43.5% of his snaps came in the slot. And it's funny, Sal, because this is one of the critiques that the Jacksonville Jaguars front office gets, is that they, like Nate ran on a whole rant about this earlier in the season, how they always end up sort of getting these guys who can only really operate and play in one position. I think Brian Thomas is a guy that has kind of bucked that trend, but generally all these guys, like Christian Kirk, slot only guy, Gabe Davis, like is a sacrificial X receiver only, really. Brenton Strange is basically what Evan Ingram is, which is a move tight end. He's not an inline guy, doesn't really complement what Evan Ingram does. So he needs Evan Ingram, which is, again, this is stupid team building, but he needs Evan Ingram out to be able to be productive. But now that that's not happening, like, yeah, I can absolutely see him being extremely usable in fantasy, especially in this really great matchup here.
Yeah, it is a great matchup. And like just looking back at when he was coming out of college, it was kind of a mystery on how he would profile out in the NFL. He obviously gets taken in the second round. A lot of great athletic testing coming out of Penn State. That's kind of a trend. But at Penn State, they were a very run-heavy team when he was there. He was battling early on Pat Freiermuth in his career, then Theo Johnson splitting reps with him. So they just had these NFL-caliber tight ends there. The production was never great. Now we're actually getting to see him in an extended role for really the first time this year, and last week, the first time he actually did it with this new quarterback, Mac Jones. Everything looks good. I think moving forward the next couple of weeks, he's somebody you can actually feel confident in, especially if you're in one of these leagues where maybe you're starting 2 flex options and you just need somebody to fill there who can get you 5, 6, 7 targets.
Okay, so I'm just looking at some of the early consensus rankings at tight end. Stop me when I get to a name where it's like, okay, this is the Brenton Strange zone. Obviously not Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, George Kittle, TJ Hawkinson, Jonnu Smith, Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews.
Yeah,
Tucker,
probably right around there.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
So we're sort of in the and like obviously Kelsey's docked a little bit because we don't know what the deal with Patrick Mahomes is, but so the Mark Andrews, Tucker Kraft, Hunter Henry zone, that's sort of where you could start to consider Brenton Strange.
Yeah, I think you can. The matchup, the usage that he's currently getting, this is a 1-point spread, so it's not like past weeks where the Jaguars have just been automatically forced to throw, especially in second halves. That could be one knock against him. But when you're comparing him to the rest of those tight ends who are not the first, second, maybe even third option in some of their passing attacks, I think Brenton Strange slides in as a pretty obvious second option right now for Mac Jones.
Man, it's pretty disgusting that I'm going to say this, but I think this game really needs Aiden O'Connell involved in it because if Aiden O'Connell's out there, I mean, just Desmond Ridder, it's just, I don't even know if this is just strictly a Desmond Ridder thing, because I think he's a whatever quarterback, but he's very new to the team and he wasn't there all offseason. And oh, by the way, they're also kind of breaking in a new play caller, Norv Turner, Scott Turner, the whole deal. Ridder was pretty awful against the Falcons on Monday night. There's really no sugarcoating that. But so I'm just trying to be a little bit fair to him. But I think if O'Connell is out there, this game could be really interesting from a fantasy perspective because we've got guys like Strange is interesting on Jacksonville's side. Obviously, Brian Thomas Jr. is a superstar, and he's in that range right now where you're just setting and forgetting him. And he's got a great matchup here against a team that just bleeds production to outside wide receivers in the Las Vegas Raiders. Jack Jones, you can get that guy on double moves all day. Brian Thomas Jr., let's get in the bag for some double moves on the outside. And then on the other side too, Jacksonville just keeps playing man coverage, keeps getting thumped by man coverage, like Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers. These guys could be really interesting. So yeah, I think this game could be good for fantasy. It just weirdly, again, sounds weird to say this, we need Aiden O'Connell to play in this game.
Yeah, we do. I mean, 2, as you pointed out, bad secondaries that can just lead to a potential shootout or just good passing days. And we know that Jacksonville, if they do get a lead, which has been rare this year, they're completely fine handing it off to whether it's Etienne or Bigsby 16 to 20 times, maybe even each if they get a lead. So yeah, we need Aiden O'Connell here. Desmond Ridder risks the chance of not a blowout, but a game where Jacksonville isn't forced to throw as much.
All right, give me your second storyline, stat-based storyline heading into week 16.
Yeah, this has to do with the Cleveland Browns. Jameis Winston gets benched last week. He throws his 3rd interception, and there were some pretty gross interceptions in this game from him. And he gets benched the final 2 drives of that game. really not much here. It's a small sample, just 9 pass attempts for Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Across these 2 drives, he targets Jerry Jeudy 4 times, so that's great, but for 13 yards on 2 catches, only 18 total passing yards on these 9 attempts. It's really hard to break this down, but he does throw a pick on his final attempt. So I was coming into the show thinking, okay, we'll see. They didn't commit to Jameis Winston after the game. Not great, but DTR didn't look good, hasn't looked good, threw a pick in the last play. Maybe that's something that stays in the mind of Kevin Stefanski. Right before we started filming, it's now known that Dorian Thompson-Robinson will start this upcoming week. Early on, I'm not seeing the point spread change on this game. I don't know if they were expecting that. The Browns are on the road as 7-point underdogs. They were still projected to have around 20 points, which was decent in a matchup against the Bengals. Now I'm a little bit concerned here. Jerry Jeudy has been a top 3 wide receiver the last 2 months with Jameis Winston taking over 21 points per game. If you take out Mike Evans, who has a little bit more of a limited sample due to injury, only Jamar Chase is scoring more fantasy points per game during that stretch. 10 targets per game for Jeudy. And Njoku might be coming back this week. Cedric Tillman could come back this week. These are all options for either your starting lineup or flex spots behind Jeudy, who's been an obvious starter. So I was coming in to see how much can we trust Jameis if he actually starts and throws another pick or two. Now, can we trust at all Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who we don't have a big sample on outside of the preseason where he played okay, but a totally different game now? This is a good matchup. That's the only reason I say this. They will be trailing. They're 7-point underdogs. I just don't know if 30-plus Dorian Robinson pass attempts are anything I want to be playing with this week.
Yeah, let me just go ahead and say this. No, we cannot start or we cannot trust Dorian Thompson-Robinson, man, because we don't have we don't have any sort of sample on him giving us good play. We've got small samples of him giving us poor play. I mean, the best stuff we've seen from him is like his rookie year preseason. Been a minute, okay?
Yeah.
Now it's very clear that the Browns, they value him, they like him. It was on my radar that they made him the QB2 ahead of Jameis Winston, sort of when Deshaun Watson was kind of floundering a little bit before he eventually got injured. So I think the books probably did see this coming in terms of why the line hasn't moved or anything like that, because this team's not that, they're just not that committed to Jameis Winston, and no team's going to commit to Jameis Winston, even though he's great for fantasy. He's super fun. He kind of leads to some fakey offensive production, but it's not good football, right? Because ultimately you turn the ball over and you put your team in really bad positions. Like if Jameis doesn't turn the football over in that game, like I think there's a chance that Cleveland could have won that game against Kansas City, just because, I mean, the Chiefs are not running away from anybody right now. And if Jameis is throwing the ball like he usually is and is not turning the ball over, man, I mean, they could have won that game. So I understand why they were frustrated, why they want to move on, why they want to see something from DTR, because if they could, for whatever reason, land on a cheap starter backup type with DTR, that would be huge for them as they try to figure out what they're going to do with this Deshaun Watson contract albatross over there. Here's the problem. Multiple issues here. Like I said, with the Jameis Winston sort of the Ponzi scheme, the wide receiver pump and dump fake scheme, whatever I've been trying to call it. Jerry Jeudy, I told this to you guys before we started recording, it was an article I just wrote recently for Yahoo. Jeudy is 5th in the NFL in receiving yards right now. In weeks 1 to 8, he was 44th. So, I mean, that's what we were looking at before when this offense had a bad quarterback and was very spread out, right? Because at that point it was Cooper, but then Tillman took Amari Cooper's spot. Now, if all these guys are back, that's another issue on top of the fact that we can't trust the quarterback issue we can't trust the quarterback position. If this target tree is spread out, that becomes even more tricky for a guy like Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah, I agree. And for a lot of people listening, Jeudy might be honestly the best player on their team the past month of the season or so, got them into the playoffs, whatever it might be. So at this point right now, what is he a complete bench? Like, I'm looking at names down in the 30s. He was going to be a top 20 receiver this week for me, especially in this matchup if Jameis was playing, maybe even top 15. Now I'm starting to look in like the 30s on the weekly rankings, guys like Adam Thielen, Josh Downs, Jaden Reed. I'm thinking he might even be behind these guys too, or at least in that range.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Jamison Williams, I'd probably rather play than Jerry Jeudy. I think once we get to, again, I'm just looking at sort of some of the consensus rankings and stuff like that. I think once we get to like some of the Bears receivers, like the Odunze, the Keenan Allens, the Deebo Samuels, DeAndre Hopkins, even Amari Cooper, his former teammate, like I'm probably playing those guys over Jerry Jeudy, or excuse me, I'm probably playing Jerry Jeudy over those guys. But yeah, once in that range of players that you were talking about, I think I'd rather play almost all of them over Jeudy with DTR under center.
Yeah, I agree. The one thing I will say is if Njoku and Tillman's been a concussion, so it's a serious one for sure. If those guys are out again, that does give a little bit of hope for Jerry Jeudy getting there if you have to start him. I mean, Malik Neighbors is a totally different talent, but playing with awful quarterbacks, if you get thrown 14 targets, you can get there in games. So that would be the one way out for Jeudy to track those injury statuses.
100%. That is a really good point. Let's go to the AFC South here and talk about the Titans backfield for your third storyline.
Yeah, the Titans backfield is something I want to watch after what we saw in week 15. On the surface, you might look at this backfield. You see Tony Pollard had 17 carries to just 4 for Tajay Spears and not think much. But then if you look a little bit closer, Spears plays 8 more snaps in this game. Pollard left for a little bit of time, not a ton, with an ankle injury. It was about a drive or two. He was getting the ankle worked on, but he did return, saw a bunch of carries after that, so he seemed fine. We'll have to track the practice reports this week, and that's really the biggest takeaway here is watch his health. But Spears ran 27 routes in this game to just 7 for Pollard. A couple weeks back on this very program, I was saying how Tony Pollard in a game with Tajay Spears active was being used in a trailing game script against the Washington Commanders. When they got down 28-0 early, it was Pollard out there over Tajay Spears in these passing down situations when they're trailing. That wasn't the case this past week, and that's kind of what we maybe thought coming into the season. Spears would play in these situations, and that really hurt Pollard's upside in this game. He just basically didn't see any passing game usage where Spears did. Spears catches 6 balls. He has a receiving touchdown in this game, and that gives him a little bit of upside on a week-to-week basis if he's going to see that role, but it just more so hurts Tony Pollard's security when we think that this Titans offense is probably going to trail most weeks. Will Levis is now potentially not going to be starting. He gets benched this past week for Mason Rudolph. So the takeaway for me is to watch Tony Pollard's status 1 because Tajay Spears would sneak into my top 20 if Pollard is not suiting up this upcoming week, missing or limited in practices. And I think this also just bumps up Spears on my final 2 weeks stashes, handcuff rankings, especially when guys like Trey Benson quietly went down with an ankle injury in the fourth quarter this past week. Zach Charbonnet just got picked up on a bunch of different waiver wires, of course, as he's been starting for Seattle. I think Spears is now getting into probably that top 5, maybe top 5 range of handcuffs rest of season.
Absolutely. Plus, he was great in this game. Yeah. I thought he looked super electric, very much like the player that I really liked watching as a rookie. I would guess that at some point this week, we're going to get news that Mason Rudolph is starting for this team. And to me, I think that actually is pretty good for the running backs in terms of like getting checkdowns and short area passing game usage.
Yeah, that's basically like if you actually watch the game, the fourth quarter, final couple of drives is where Spears got a lot of his usage in the passing game, but it was from Mason Rudolph. He was willing to check down to him. And Spears this year has just been banged up. Like in almost half of his games, he's been on the injury report. He's missed 4 games with hamstring or concussion issues. So you look at his efficiency stats this year, and yeah, he's averaging like 4.5 yards per touch compared to 5.5 last year. Still not terrible, but also there's some context to add there. If he does see extended run moving forward, I have no reservations that this guy can be the efficient running back we saw last year when he was playing next to Derrick Henry, taking over 50% of the snaps in the majority of games away from Henry. So yeah, I think this is a guy that should be now on all rosters heading into the final couple weeks.
Yeah, I've talked about a team a lot on this show where I have Tony Pollard on it, and I'm pretty bummed that I don't think I can really trust him as much in week 16. Pretty decent matchup against the Colts. Week 17 matchup against the Jaguars. Would really like to play Tony Pollard there. Luckily, I have the running back that I'm going to talk about in my secret stat. So, little spoiler alert or sort of a preview there. But yeah, bummer for Pollard, who I think has played really well this season, has been a nice signing for the Tennessee Titans. He's played well, like I said, but Tajay Spears is talented too. And I think it would be kind of a smart move to get a look at him down the stretch for this Tennessee Titans coaching staff. And that's really all they're doing at this point is evaluating for next year. The staff will be back. They're probably looking for a new quarterback. Can Tajay Spears be sort of mixed in a little bit more this year if he can avoid concussions, which he struggled with for most of this season? Speaking of running backs on the rise, Sal, your fourth storyline, this guy is rapidly rising up the ranks.
Yeah, the rise of Rico Dotto. I mean, it's crazy. I feel like in every matchups article, I've been writing about Rico Dotto the past month on Yahoo because he's just had an amazing schedule, but he's taken advantage of all these matchups. It's now 3 straight weeks where he set a career high in either total yardage or rushing yards. This past week, he does it against the Carolina Panthers. He runs for 149 yards on the ground, career high. 25 carries, also a career high. It felt like just, 5-6 weeks ago, we were hoping for Rico Dotto to see 12 touches in a game, maybe get 50% of the snaps or more from Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook, whoever else is in this backfield. Now it's a complete afterthought. Like if Zeke gets on the field for 2 or 3 touches on a drive, it seems crazy at this point. Dotto is commanding the snaps, the backfield opportunities, just everything. And over the past 4 games, according to Ryan Heath on Twitter, 85% of the backfield carries, for Rico Dowdle. That would easily rank in the top 10 amongst running backs during that time. 120 rushing yards per game is second amongst all backs, and about 16 fantasy points per game has him as a borderline RB1. 3 straight games of at least 120 yards, all against easy matchups. The Giants on Thanksgiving, the Bengals defensive line, the Panthers last week. But this week, it's not like a difficult spot. It's not as easy as it was in those ones, or at least as beneficial. But the Bucs this year allow top 10 production to running backs and rushing yards per play this season. So it's another spot where it should be a close game. They're not like 7-point underdogs. This Dallas offense actually looked good last week, Cooper Rush. They seem to be getting some things going. I'm going right back to Rico Dowdle. He's once again, last week for me, he was a top 12 running back. This week for me in this matchup, he's my RB 11 early on in the week, and I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, obviously, you couldn't have asked for more cakewalk matchups the last 3 weeks than the Giants, the Bengals, and the Panthers. That's a huge part of why Rico Dowdle has been so productive. But we talk about this all the time. You can only play the teams that are on your schedule, and if you are going into good matchups, smash the matchups. He's the most productive running back. He leads the NFL in rushing yards over the last 3 weeks. Like this is what you want from a running back if you're going to face these cakewalk run defenses. Crushed a matchup. He has. Week 16 against the Buccaneers. I mean, obviously the Cowboys playing at home is always tricky, but they are at least at home. It's not a stay away matchup. So I like your optimism here for Rico Dowdle. I will just add one thing on this whole Rico Dowdle stuff is that producer Colin has been, yapping my ear off about this for the last probably few weeks or so, that this young offensive line has played really well and is sort of starting to coalesce and come together, which that happens when you throw out a bunch of young guys on the offensive line. If these players can play, if they can, swim instead of sink, they're going to get better as the year goes on. That's definitely happened in Dallas. And over the last 3 weeks, Rico Dowdle on man gap runs is averaging 8.12 yards per carry. I mean, they're smashing holes open for Dowdle. He's effectively hitting those holes. I mean, most of their runs are zone concept runs where he has a 67% success rate, which is still incredible. But when they go to these man gap plays, that's where he can really gash these opposing defenses. Again, great matchups, I understand, but still, he's really thrived there. And I think the offensive line deserves some credit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And he had a long run of 12 yards in that game when he gets 149 yards. I think he had one other run of 10 for double digits. The rest was legitimately just 5, 6, 7-yard carries, an 8-yard carry. If you go back and watch all these, every single run was efficient. It was good. Everything you're talking about, the vision is improving as well. Yeah, I think Dowdle is great. And this is a guy who signed a 1-year deal this offseason for like $1.2 million to maybe be the backup, maybe see a little bit more juice than that. Whether the Cowboys re-sign him this offseason, which they probably should if this is the route they were going to go, might as well invest in that, or somebody else gets him, he's going to get a bag. And a bag for him might be $6 million a year, but that's 6 times what he's making right now. So congrats to Rico Dowdle.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he could end up with, the Miles Sanders, DeAndre Swift type contract. I think that's it's pretty fair for a guy like Rico. Maybe that's even overshooting it. This is still a small sample of his career that he's played this well, but he's a young back that doesn't have a bunch of tread on the tires, like as opposed to a guy like a Swift or Sanders. Swift is on his 3rd team. Sanders had some decent run at that point. We don't have a lot of exposure to Rico Dowdle, which could be good. It could be bad, but typically with these low mileage backs, they're really good investments to make. And yeah, if I'm Dallas, I'm definitely just trying to re-sign this guy, bring him back, and add another back in the draft for sure. But I wouldn't be trying to spend I know I don't know anything with the running back draft class. I know Ashton Genty is supposed to be really great. Obviously, he was like a run-up for the Heisman, whatever. He's obviously a superstar. But, I mean, I think he'll probably go higher than where Dallas is going to end up picking because they're going to maybe steal at least a couple more games down the stretch. I wouldn't be messing around with their first-round pick at running back, man. I'd try to have Rico Dowdle and maybe add like an explosive complement at some point. But, yeah, man, I think he's played himself into the RB1 job in Dallas next year.
Yeah, I think he definitely has. We'll see how the season ends. And yeah, like that $6 million a year range for him a couple of years ago probably is a little bit too high, but based on the recent cap, I think 5 or 6 is probably what makes sense for Rico Dowdle. There is a lot of running backs. I would say like 6 to 8 will probably be 2nd or 3rd round picks, which is good for fantasy. Hurts guys like Rico Dowdle when we have to start to decide, okay, is this rookie going to take over? Probably the case, but he has just no competition right now. If he adds a little bit of competition next year, it doesn't automatically mean now he's not at all relevant for us. So it's been a good year. We'll see how it finishes. I think this matchup this week isn't that bad at all against Tampa.
No, yeah, I definitely think he is a guy that if you have him, you're probably trying to start him this week. All right, Sal, give me your 5th, your final, and your secret stat for week 16.
Yeah, this wide receiver is having a career year for sure, and I would say that continued this past week. Now, he's not thought to be the top wide receiver on his team, and I would say a lot of the public might not even view him as a top 2 pass catcher on his team, despite this past week, once again, seeing a 20% target share for the 6th time this year, so solid target volume in his offense. He finished as a top 12 wide receiver this past week for the 3rd time, kind of surprisingly this year when you find out who this player is. And he's now had at least 11 fantasy points in 50% of his starts. That 11 fantasy point mark, anytime you're around 9 or 10, it's kind of a flex-worthy play. So he's been pretty consistent as a flex option in leagues this year, despite going undrafted in most drafts this past summer. Now, he's a former first-round pick who currently ranks top 10 in the NFL in passer rating when targeted, which is ahead of the other first-round receiver on his team, who many would view as the wide receiver 1. He has 7 touchdowns this year, 3 more than his first 3 years in the league combined. He's finally healthy. He's having a breakout season for his standards, or at least based on our expectations heading into the year. He's a wide receiver 2 in a very capable offense. Matt Harmon, who is the secret player hidden by my secret stats?
It's Rashad Bateman.
This is Rashad Bateman, and this one I did for you. I closed out the show for you here.
What a guy!
It's a Matt Hartman believer and special here, but also because I watched this guy put up 2 touchdowns, look great. Lamar throwing amazing balls to him as well. But it's been a good year for Rashad Bateman, who, depending on how the season ends, could threaten a 1,000-yard season. It'd be a lot.
It would be a lot. He has 654 right now, but 7 touchdowns. He's the wide receiver 36 on the season. I know season-long stats, can lie to you, but he's stayed healthy, which is the big thing. He's only had a couple of minor injury flare-ups. He's sandwiched between guys like Jamison Williams, who's played 2 fewer games, and Keenan Allen, who has not. He's also played 2 fewer games. So, again, it's staying healthy for him has been the big thing, and he's definitely, no question, been like a better in best ball type of pick for sure, because it's been tough. He's another guy when he's faced the Bucks or the Giants, like these cakewalk secondaries, he's absolutely smashed those matchups. It's a little difficult based on the usage to pinpoint when those big weeks are coming and things like that. But man, he's definitely really talented. He's probably never going to be the same. I know this sounds crazy after the downfield plays he made this past week. He's probably never going to be as explosive as he was coming out of college after, serious lower body injuries to start his career. But just to put a pin on the fantasy, usage for him and the fantasy scoring, like I said, wide receiver 36 on the season, 10.4 points per game. Xavier Worthy, wide receiver 38 on the season, 10.3 points per game. The gap between where those 2 guys were drafted could not be any wider. So he's absolutely been a really big hit for, like I said, mostly best ball teams. But Bateman, I could talk about Bateman for another hour for sure. With the way he's played lately and him kind of being the spike week guy, does it affect how you feel about Zay Flowers at all, who I know people have been frustrated with?
Yeah, Flowers continues to see the target share. I think over the last month, it's a 28% target share. Just not getting the touchdowns at this point. Anybody but Devontae Walker is popping off for touchdowns this past week. Mark Andrews continues to be a threat. Yeah, continues to be a threat around the red zone. So Flowers is getting the target volume. He's getting targets in the short to intermediate to even sometimes downfield parts of the field. I think it's just this weird stretch or pocket where if he scores 1 touchdown over the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's really not as much of a concern. There was a stretch of games, maybe 4 out of 5 weeks where he was topping 100 yards. He was looking great. Got a little bit banged up, which kind of went under the radar, played through that injury, kind of led to a couple of down performances in the 30-yard range. I think he's probably over that injury now, but who knows? And at the end of the day, he's still getting the target volume in a high-volume offense. Wouldn't be shocked if this week he comes out 90, 100 yards touchdown. So I'm not as worried. He's still in my starting lineups. That
was Devontae Walker's only target, not just catch.
Wow.
His only target of the season was the 21-yard catch for a touchdown against the Giants.
That's pretty crazy.
Hey, yeah, he's due for regression. So yeah, just to update, because shame on me, I read off full PPR stats there. Disgusting move by me. Wide receiver 36 on the season is Rashad Bateman. Wide receiver 37 on the season is Xavier Worthy. So again, interesting comparison for those 2 players. But yeah, Bateman has definitely played well. I wonder if they'll adjust his contract again after they kind of had to do something weird with his deal because he couldn't get the 5th-year option because he didn't report to camp last year, the whole deal. So he has been exactly what I think they want from him. From a fantasy perspective, he's never going to be an every week starter just with the offense that he plays in and everything, but he's good. He's a good player. I'm glad you highlighted him for the secret stat here. I knew it right away as soon as I saw him. Oh, this is definitely Bateman. But I appreciate you did that for me, Sal. Thank you very much. We're going to take our first break. When we come back, we'll run through my 5 stat storylines of the week right after this. All right, we're back. Sal, let's get into my 5 stat-based storylines here for week 16. Starting with number 1, Aaron Rodgers over the last 2 weeks has played like a top 5 quarterback. He has 0.35 EPA per dropback. That is 4th behind Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Jared Goff. His 10.3 adjusted yards per attempt is 5th among quarterbacks. He's averaging 9.5 air yards per attempt, which is 6th. So he's pushing the ball downfield. He actually leads all quarterbacks over the last 2 weeks in completions of 10 plus yards. He is behind only Josh Allen and Jaden Daniels in EPA added on scrambles. So it's not just, hey, he's sitting back in the pocket, an old man pushing it down the field. No, he's actually, he's moving the ball with his legs as well. Rest of the season schedule for the Jets: Rams, at Bills, and Dolphins. So some potentially interesting high-scoring games here for the New York Jets. I mean, it's too little too late for the Jets. It's probably too little too late for a lot of fantasy managers out there necessarily, Sal, but depending on your lineup, maybe you made it to the postseason with Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson, maybe a Breece Hall, although he's obviously dealing with some injuries. How are we feeling about the Jets passing game and the surge of this unit of late?
Yeah, this has to be just an absolute tease for any Jets fans out there. This is what they thought they were getting to start the year, what they thought they were getting when they signed Davante Adams, and it has finally come now when nothing matters in week 15 and now 16 of the season. But for fantasy, yeah, like if you have these guys, which I think a lot of teams probably have still, Garrett Wilson, maybe Davante Adams that got to the fantasy postseason, you got rewarded this past week. Wilson got a little frustrated, still scores a touchdown. Adams, though, I mean, I was looking up, he had a decent day, 60, 70 yards. And then on the final 2 drives of the game, he catches 4 balls for 139 yards and a touchdown, just goes absolutely ballistic in like final 6-7 minutes of that contest. But I mean, in terms of moving forward for those guys, they're already in your starting lineups most likely. For Adams, for Rodgers, he was always buried as like quarterback 25, 26, 27 for me in my rankings when no teams are on bye. I think now he probably cracks right around the top 20, like QB 20 on the week, especially with guys like Jameis Winston not starting. So he's in a range still below, though, for me, Jordan Love, Bo Nix, Justin Herbert, depending on his status for Thursday night. So I'm not still trying to die to start Rodgers, but really in Superflex leagues is now where he becomes more of a viable option, especially in some of these matchups like the Bills or even Miami. It could be a potential shootout 40 attempt game for Rodgers, which we haven't seen too much this year.
Just to put a point on how random and crazy this Aaron Rodgers stretch to end the season is, I'm not going to use the full season sample here, but just weeks 9 to 13. So right before this 2-game stretch, he was 32nd in EPA per dropback. Dead last. I mean, behind guys like Mac Jones, Daniel Jones, Cooper Rush. I mean, it's crazy just what the turnaround we've seen from Rodgers here, which you're right. If I'm a Jets fan, I guess this is fun to watch, but man, it would drive me a little bit crazy.
Yeah, and it's going to get even crazier when, as a Packers fan, understanding the Aaron Rodgers off seasons, it'll get even better when he does this for 2 more weeks. He looks like an MVP type player, and then there's rumors of retirement for the next 3 to 6 months for Jets fans to have to consider and deal with. But that is the Aaron Rodgers game at this point. He looks really good right now. It's good for all of his weapons. Superflex starter, I would say, at best for him specifically.
Yeah, I do like the potential matchups with the Rams and the Bills, just if he can keep this up. I mean, by the way, shout out to Olu Fashanu, their left tackle, first-round draft pick. I think he's a big part of why this stretch has happened for Rodgers, because he's actually been protected. So nice little parting gift by Joe Douglas there. Although the Malachi Corley draft pick, maybe not so much. He's been like a healthy scratch behind a practice squad receiver of late. That wasn't a great one by old Big Joe there. So just get before we move on, what do you think happens with Rodgers next year? You think he's back with his team? If he's not back with his team, does he just retire? Do podcasts and Netflix documentaries, and I don't know, maybe does he still go on Pat McAfee if he's retired, or does he play for another team? And if there is another team out there, who the hell is it?
Yeah, I think he stays with this team as of right now. I mean, maybe these final few weeks really swing that as well. If he keeps playing this well, it's just a little bit easier of something to swallow if you're the Jets fan, Jets organization. It seems like all throughout the year, and this is years now, like the reports change basically by the month in the news cycle on if this guy will be with this team, if he's retiring, if he's changing. I think at the end of the day, it's a lot of money. It really comes down to, does he still like football, which we don't know. That's just him specifically. I'll say the favorite for me is that he remains on the Jets for one final year.
He does seem to be having fun. So there's at least that. And I wonder, I think if you're hiring a head coach this offseason, you're not doing it with like, all right, we got to make Aaron Rodgers happy. I think Rodgers at this point has to, I don't know, famous last words, has to have enough self-awareness to say, yeah, this is maybe about me for one more year, and then they're going to draft a young quarterback. Maybe I mentor him. He at least seemed mildly interested in mentoring Zach Wilson. So if he likes whatever quarterback they take in the first round, that could be at least something interesting there. But I wonder what Rodgers' presence and the fact that you're right. He probably, when you're hiring a head coach in January, you're probably not going to have full clarity on whether Rodgers even wants to play football yet. I mean, he could be off in the darkness retreat or whatever. So he might not even be talking to head coaching candidates. So that should be certainly pretty interesting. All right, let's go to my second stat-based storyline here. The Bengals face the Cleveland Browns in Week 16. We talked about the other side of that matchup earlier in Sal's section. Let's talk about the Bengals here. Cleveland, they play single high at the second highest rate among defenses per fantasy points data. That is pretty much what you'd expect from a Jim Schwartz defense. That's what they do. They're not as good doing it this year as they were in previous seasons. But also, as you'd expect, Jamar Chase is going absolutely nuts against single high. He's got 60% of the team touchdowns, 3.14 yards per route run, et cetera, et cetera. The great stats go on and on. But a lot of his work has actually come on big plays in the open field. He's averaging 7.1 yards after catch per reception. So, by the way, that is nuts when you consider, single high coverage or the middle of the field's kind of more so closed there. So, again, just shows what an incredible season that Chase is having. But Higgins has actually been the shot play guy, the deep threat when they see single high. So if Burrow likes to look, he can alert like a go route on the outside or a deep out or something like that. Higgins' 32% first read target share is not far behind Jamar Chase, 35% against single high. He has 400 air yards in 9 games. Chase has 672 in 14 games. So I think Higgins, he's obviously a guy that has mostly been productive, although he had a down game somewhat recently here in the last few weeks, Sal. I think Higgins is in a really, really good spot for fantasy managers this week.
Yeah, last week he was a top 10 receiver. I think he's a top 10 receiver this week. You're obviously starting him. You're starting Jamar Chase. I love the stats on Chase. I took him over 87.5 receiving yards this morning, so that feels good. I was looking at the same things on fantasy points in terms of single high rates. Similar matchups this year for Chase. He's averaging about 95 receiving yards per game. So you're probably getting a solid performance. Let's call it 15 to 20 points out of Chase, maybe even both of those guys. What it comes down to for me, though, is now that we know Jameis isn't starting, can DTR keep this game close enough to actually make Joe Burrow throw 40-plus times a game? We know the Bengals' defense has been bad. It remains bad these last couple of weeks. It's forcing Joe Burrow to lead the NFL in pass attempts, which is fueling all of these huge performances, not only for Higgins and Chase, but even Chase Brown getting 4, 5, 6 catch games as well. But if they start to get up by 14, 15 points, 20 points, which has not been the case this year, you could see Chase Brown's safe either way in this scenario. He looks great either way this week, but you can see a little bit less passing volume, which hurts both of those guys getting there in a major way, which at this point of the season, all those big Jamar Chase 170, 200-yard games, you would love it to happen in the fantasy postseason. I'm just concerned at what the offense on the other side is going to do to fuel that this week.
Oh, man, that's such a good point. Such a good point. By the way, Chase Brown, over his last 3 games, has an 85% carry share in the Bengals backfield. I mean, he's just like no one else is involved. He's also played on 86% of the snaps, which is, I believe, second among running backs in this stretch behind only Chuba Hubbard, who obviously...
Poor man's Rico Dowdle. Poor man's Rico Dowdle.
He is the poor man's Rico Dowdle.
Yeah.
Couldn't be doing it in any more different ways, by the way. So much passing game usage for Chase Brown, 12% target share, but still, he's obviously been pretty good as a rusher as well. Yeah. But anyways, God, that is the big question here. If DTR can't keep pace in this game, I don't know. We could see the Bengals, they never blow anybody out just with their defense, but we could potentially see them blow out the Browns this week.
Yeah, no matter what, you're starting all of these guys, but it's just the question of when we're trying to think about how much of a ceiling do these guys have. It's pretty massive because of the offense that they're in. But if Burrow's not throwing 42 times and he's throwing 30 or 32 times instead, that's obviously a lot of upside that goes away for every single piece of this offense.
God, Jameis, if he could just avoid the pick 6 demon, he can't. It's a part of him.
Just throw 2 picks instead of 3 last week, and we're in a good spot this week, but couldn't have. Had to go for the hat trick.
That third one was pretty disgusting too. So.
Yeah.
What can you do? All right, third stat-based storyline. Despite mounting injuries on defense, the Lions have played man coverage on 47.1% of opponent dropbacks since Week 10 per fantasy points data. That is the highest rate in the league. It's at least on my radar if we see Aaron Glenn maybe change things up at some point with, just the absolute rash of injuries that team has faced. on the other side of it here. But so far he's just continued to do what he does. And look, I think even with rough personnel on the other side, if you blitz a lot, you pressure the passer, and you're playing man coverage, it still at least makes things harder on the quarterback. So maybe we continue to see that style of defense from the Lions. The important point is in week 18, they have a matchup with Justin Jefferson. In week 17, they have a matchup with the San Francisco 49ers. But this week, Chicago Bears on the schedule. When you look at man coverage versus from the Bears pass catcher perspective, trust me, none of the numbers are pretty. There's not a good looking number for the Bears wide receivers and really the entire passing game all season long. However, DJ Moore does lead the Bears with 24 first read targets. He leads the team in receptions and yards versus man coverage this season. 16% of those targets have been designed plays like screens and such. And he's gained 6.3 yards after the catch per reception against man coverage. So we've seen this a lot, especially since, Thomas Brown took over as the play caller, now obviously the play calling head coach. They've really emphasized DJ Moore as that screen player, which, by the way, be so much better if you didn't just stick him at X receiver and we were doing this stuff too. If you moved him around a little bit, I think that would be nice. But hey, nothing's going to be good in this Bears passing game. So at the very least, I think, Sal, he's in line for some scammy production against this banged up Lions defense. So DJ Moore, any of these Bears pass catchers, do you personally have the fortitude to start some of these guys despite what we just watched on Monday night?
Yeah, I could start DJ Moore. I think he's a top 24 option this week. Since Thomas Brown took over, he has at least 7 targets in every game. He had 8 targets last week. He's also ran 100% of the routes the last 2 months, which is like maybe something you expect, but even these number one receivers on teams are in like the 80% range for some teams. So he's basically never leaving the field. Like you mentioned, he's getting all this scheme production. And this past week's game on Monday Night Football was maybe as bad as it can get, like under 300 yards of total offense, 170 passing yards in that one. I would hope that that's closer to the floor than an average performance for Caleb Williams moving forward. His passing yard total this upcoming week for Caleb Williams is around the 220, 230 range. So that feels a little bit better, especially for your number one receiver in DJ Moore. So I think he's within the top 24. As for these other guys, outside my top 36. If you have guys like Josh Downs, Adam Thielen, even this week, I'm starting them over Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze. They're not the worst options. Like if you're forced in a multi-flex league or a deeper league to put Keenan Allen in there and Rome Odunze, that was the order I would probably rank it in, then it's okay. But I'm not trying to get those guys in my lineups outside of DJ Moore. He's a top 24 option early on for me.
I like that, the way you kind of sort those rankings out. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, I mean, DJ just, with the scheme production, he's going to have the highest floor and probably the highest ceiling of these guys too. I just can't wait to see this team with like a new offensive coordinator, hopefully some improvement on the offensive line and maybe a thinner target tree, because it was a rough watch. And look, what's your concern level about like Caleb Williams? If you were hypothetically somebody like me, who said earlier in this show that I spent the number one overall pick on Caleb Williams in a Superflex Dynasty League this offseason with people that subscribe to my website. So embarrassing at this point. Although we made the playoffs, it's fine. Thanks to Jamar Chase. How concerned would you be? Like, what is your level of concern with what we've seen out of Caleb Williams in year one? I think Aikman did a great job kind of highlighting a lot of the turn down throws that Caleb Williams is just not taking right now that are open, and there are open receivers out there. He just there's a lot going on here. So what's your level of concern?
I would say not a lot of concern. Like there's been a lot of positives from Caleb Williams this year, especially for the first 2 months of the season when he was dealing with some pretty brutal play calling and just personnel that was out there on the field when it shouldn't have been. So there's been enough flashes, both with his arm, decision-making, mobility as well, ability to scramble and escape is kind of what we knew from college already, but it's been a little bit crafted over the season, which is good to see, instead of being chaotic like maybe the first month or two of the season. That's gotten a little bit more polished. He's still not the perfect quarterback, but he's in his rookie year and not the greatest environment, especially when it comes to offensive line. We've seen guys, Bryce Young as recent as this specific year, other guys like Baker Mayfield over the years, when you just get the right situation, the right coaching staff, a little bit more reps under your belt, you can take it to a next level. So the guy's 12, 13 games into his career. I'm not concerned if I'm a Bears fan, if I'm Andy Behrens. I think this is all completely fine. You see the flashes, you take those, and there really hasn't been disastrous meltdown performances consistently, and I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I think there's enough positives for you to not freak out about, but
yeah.
I'm a little nervous just about the whole thing and just where his confidence level is at. But man, he could certainly, if we just get a new system in here and clean things up, and this is just, it's so much for a rookie quarterback to deal with. The fact that the guy's, on his second play caller, that play caller is also the second head coach now. It's a lot to deal with, a lot of chaos, but chaos tends to follow the Bears. And I am a little concerned about that for Caleb Williams in this entire operation. All right, let's get to my fourth storyline here for this week. Since week 10, the Tennessee Titans pass defense sort of kind of starting to fall apart here. The Titans ranked 28th in EPA per dropback allowed and 29th in dropback success rate allowed since week 10. This is interesting to talk about with a Colts matchup on deck here. Colts route participation in week 15 against Denver with Alec Pierce suffering a mid-game concussion. Michael Pittman led the team with 97.7% of the routes. Josh Downs, coming off an injury, 86%. Adonai Mitchell, 46.5%, sort of taking that X-receiver role from Alec Pierce. And Pierce was at 44.3%. So I'm curious sort of where you're ranking these Colts receivers in what looks like a pretty good matchup, particularly for wide receivers lining up on the outside. I don't know if we can really consider Mitchell a fantasy option, but we should note that Pittman and Downs had 9 and 8 targets in this pretty messy game against the Denver Broncos. Look, Denver is one of the best defenses in the league. We are going to the other side of pass defense efficiency here with Tennessee in this matchup. How are we kind of sorting out these Colts receivers, and does Alec Pierce's presence really just sort of concentrate targets at the top two guys?
Yeah, I think it should. Like, at this point, we're in week 16 of the season. Adonai Mitchell has had multiple chances this year to kind of earn a larger role or maybe even push aside Alec Pierce, and he hasn't been able to. So even if there is no Pierce this week with the concussion and Mitchell is on the field, sure, he does have the ability to earn some targets, but he just hasn't done it this year that I'm concerned that he's going to pull legit target share more than Pierce was taking away from guys like Josh Downs and Michael Pittman. So when I projected this week, yeah, both guys had at least 8 targets last week. Ashton Doolin's also been banged up just in terms of other guys that could be on the field rotating in and out receivers. Those guys should be on the field for 80, 90+% of the game in Pittman and Downs. The problem is we're in week 16. There's no buys. Anthony Richardson has not given me really any faith consistently at any point this year. So when I look at my rankings, like in the low 20s, it's to the point where it's guys like DK Metcalf, Marvin Harrison. So now we're automatically into the 30s for me. He probably settles in early on right now in the week around my wide receiver. This is for Josh Downs, 33, 34 around Jaden Reed, around Jameson Williams. Pittman a tier below that, I would say. He probably gets near those other Bears receivers in Keenan Allen and Adunze we were talking about earlier. I'm starting Downs in some leagues. I don't feel terrible about it. Yeah. It's just like when I'm comparing him next to some of these other guys, I like their overall situations better. I like maybe their overall health better than what Downs has been dealing with the last couple of weeks. So Downs is the one guy that I feel okay with starting. Pittman, probably not somebody I'm trying to get to. My biggest takeaway from this is that week 17, Brian Thomas, Jaguars coming to town. This is making me feel even better for my shares if I can get to the fantasy championship with Brian Thomas against this Titans defense that you have now laid out to me is not as good as it once was.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, again, they've had a lot of issues and injuries at cornerback. So, yeah, I mean, Brian Thomas definitely, I'm with you. I'm hoping my Brian Thomas team can survive and advance to week 17 to feast on this matchup. Yeah, for this week, I got a Josh Downs team. I feel okay about that. I even have a Michael Pittman team that, strangely enough, had a first round bye, and I'm going to probably, and I think based on the rest of the wide receiver room, I'm going to end up starting him, but it will be sort of weighing his ceiling floor projection versus a guy like a Jaden Reed, and I have Cortland Sutton on this team. He's way ahead of all these guys at this point. So yeah, it's going to be, I think you can start Pittman and not feel embarrassed about it, especially if Pierce is not out there. Cause I think Pittman's just a more trusted player at this point than Adonai Mitchell, who, hey, shoot, if you thought Anthony Richardson had problems as a thrower, wait till you see Adonai Mitchell throwing the ball against the Denver Broncos. He's got even bigger issues as a thrower than Anthony Richardson does. So I think you can start Pittman and feel okay about it. But yeah, Downs is probably the safer bet just because he's been the better player on film and on the field all year long. All right, it's time. 5th final secret stat. Sal Vetri, I am very curious if you can guess it this week. This mystery running back got some excellent usage in week 15, and you may have missed it because the results were whatever, and it was a pretty game. So leave it at that. Despite some questions about this running back's role coming into the game, he ended up playing 77% of his team's snaps, while the running back 2 on the team played only 3.8%. So he was not relevant at all. Even better, this mystery running back was the only running back only running back on the team to receive a rush attempt. He was also an active participant in the passing game, running around on 65% of the dropbacks, scoring to fantasy points data, and gathering a 12.9% target share. Who is this mystery running back, Sal Vetri? And once we reveal him, I'm very curious how high we can rank him in week 16.
All right. 2 names come to mind, then I'm pretty sure it's one of these names. The first name that came to mind is Chuba Hubbard. The second is Isaac Correndo. Now, here is why I will be choosing the guy I'm choosing. You said only one running back saw a carry. And I was watching the games. I was on a flight back from Vegas this weekend, and I saw Mike Boone. Yeah, I saw Mike Boone get a carry for the Carolina Panthers. And I said, Mike Boone's in the NFL still? Mike Boone's on the damn Carolina Panthers? So that's how I know it's not Chuba Hubbard, who did see a ton of usage overall. I'm going to go with Isaac Correndo on this one. You saying running back twice also leads me to believe that Debo or Brock Purdy or somebody else had rushing attempts in that backfield. Isaac Correndo is my final answer.
Isaac Correndo is the correct answer. Yeah, I thought, listen, you let me have a Bateman thing for the last one. I gotta let you get this one right. So I wanted to emphasize running back there because I thought that might be what gave it away. Yeah, man. I mean, Correndo, great usage. So both of my Correndo teams were able to advance this past week, and I'm looking at the running back rankings, and I mean, with that usage, it's not the most ideal matchup against the Miami Dolphins, but I think I can confidently call him a top 15 running back this week.
Yeah, he's right around there for me. As of right now, he is my running back 16. So again, week with no buys, I'm high on Rico Dotto. We have James Cook in an unbelievable matchup this week. Jonathan Taylor's actually in a beneficial spot as a home favorite for once. So I put him right ahead of guys like Brian Robinson this week. We'll see what Breece Hall's status is looking like. Put him ahead of Tony Pollard, Ramondre Stevenson. He's a starter for this week. It's a 1-point spread this game against Miami. So should be a neutral, if not positive, game script the entire time. That sets up nicely for 15-plus touches for Correndo, who's looked good on his touches so far this year. Definitely a starter. For sure a flex option if you're loaded at running back even, but he'll be in most lineups this week.
You want to know how disgusting this... I've talked about this league a lot. It was the league we drafted, the Fantasy Football Expo. It's the Kings Classic. Just, again, really just outrageous players. Nobody good on the waiver wire ever. Nobody. I was away with my wife on a little mini vacation on Friday, Saturday this week. So I'm sitting there just getting out of the spa. I'm like, all right, George Pickens ruled out. We got to throw him in the IR. Who are we picking up? Off, again, the most disgusting waiver wire you can possibly imagine. So I go over to an app that will not be names, projections for the week. Just like, hey, we're about to talk stash candidates in the next section. What are we doing here? I got to stash somebody just in case of injury. The highest projected running back was Mike Boone of the Carolina Panthers. Man. So I was aware of Mike Boone's presence on the Panthers, but that's what this waiver wire legitimately is like. And I'm looking at it this week. Is it Craig Reynolds time? Whatever fab we've got left.
That's a great option compared to what you got.
Yeah, geez, no kidding. I mean, I got Zamir White in the IR just for like, all right, at least I know who this guy is, I mean, so that's what we're dealing with in this league.
Yeah, I mean, you're legitimately like digging down to the RB 80s on the season when you're in that range, like, Travis Homner, maybe Pierre Strong. I mean, those are some rough names to have to be rostering and let alone maybe starting. Oof. I mean, best of luck.
Hey, thank you, JSN, Brian Thomas Jr. Thank you to those bros. Pickens, please come back ASAP. Please, we need it. Okay. CeeDee Lamb, love the scam usage. Let's go, enjoying it. I'm first place in this league. I think. Yeah.
You start 2 running backs.
Yes.
Yeah, you can get by.
It's a lot of flex players. I started Marvin Mims last week.
Oof, nice.
Big win with Marvin Mims in the flex. It is a disgusting league that I love. Thank you, Bob Lung, for allowing me to participate. Not getting relegated. Because I've got Mike Boone. Now, seriously, I was like, wow, this is a pretty decent stash. Chuba Hubbard goes down. Next man up. On that note, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk about some actually good stash candidates on the other side of it right after this. All right, we're back. Let's wrap it up, Sal, with some stash candidates. You've got a lot to run through here, and I think you kind of want to give the people sort of a look at what the contingent value for these guys are right now.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, You're listening to this on a Wednesday or maybe later in the week. Your waiver's already cleared. So we're really playing for week 17 championships at this point, maybe week 18 if that's your championship. So you're kind of just playing for safety. Safety for both your team, handcuffing your stud running backs, but also trying to block your opponent, your potential opponent for week 17 if you're looking ahead and what the bracket could look like in projections in case their running back was to go down. So some obvious names here for me are, like I mentioned it last week, just go to the running back rankings for the week. Saquon Barkley. Okay, we saw him get nicked up a little bit last week. Kenneth Gainwell is somebody, definitely if you have Saquon Barkley, you should be having on your team. But if your potential opponent does, I'd pick up Kenneth Gainwell as well so you can block him and then maybe even start that backup against him in week 17 in case something was to happen. Same thing with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. A more obvious name, maybe some less obvious ones. Joe Mixon had an injury last week. He came out of that game. He's battled ankle injuries really all season long. So Dameon Pierce, we're not even sure if he would be like a workhorse back in this offense, but profile's out as that right now. Josh Jacobs goes down. Emmanuel Wilson. There's also Chris Brooks there, but Wilson continues to be the guy ahead of him in that backfield. We just talked about these guys. Yeah, Chuba Hubbard, Mike Boone is somebody who, like, until we just spent 5 minutes talking about it, I don't think anybody knew was on the Carolina Panthers, but Hubbard was seeing 95% of the snaps. They're down their top 3 backs. If Hubbard was to miss week 17, Boone would take over. And he's had some strong week 17 performances in the past as well.
True.
Older running back now, but can catch passes, has some explosiveness. And then Jahmyr Gibbs, now with this David Montgomery news, I think Craig Reynolds will be picked up in some waiver wires, especially some really serious leagues after waivers, but he'll be out there in a lot of those. Some of the reports early on are that Gibbs is going to be like our workhorse, our guy is what Dan Campbell's saying, but I do think Craig Reynolds will still see some usage, but the reason you're picking him up is if something was to happen to Gibbs. So go through the entire rankings this week and you could do that. Make sure you're covered for week 17. You don't want to have to be starting Mike Boone without having to start Mike Boone in the championship. If your starting running back goes down, have those guys there. And then also try and block your opponents. There's no point in rostering that backup tight end or quarterback if you don't need them in week 17. Just try and roster guys that could either block your opponent or help you if you see an injury pop up.
Do you have a take on Sione Vaikai, the backup running back for the Detroit Lions?
No, I don't have much of a take on him. I think he was like the 23rd maybe running back in that range where I was doing some draft prep on him. And I would say that he was one of those players that when you look up his, college stats and stuff, you have to go to like your 4th data provider option because the top 3 just didn't have anything on him. So I have absolutely no take there.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's Craig Reynolds is what I will say.
Yeah, I think so too. And yeah, I mean, dude, I can't wait to end this. I know I'd love to talk to you all day long, but as soon as I get off this podcast, Sal, I can't wait to just whatever money we've got left in this cursed Kings Classic League, throw it all at Craig Reynolds. That is what I'm looking to do right after this is over. And yeah, I mean, he would be a great option that I think is certainly widely available. But what's your strategy when it comes to sort of protect, like you said, covering your own assets, right? Your own running backs, like having the backup to those guys versus, for example, like obviously this is a terrible example, but like in a league with like Bijan Robinson, like do you want Tyler Algier is pretty well rostered. So again, pretty bad example. So maybe the Kenneth Gainwell one is a little bit more applicable. If you have Saquon Barkley, what is sort of your kind of logic of, do I want to make sure I get Kenneth Gainwell or do I want to prioritize having somebody else's backup in case that person goes down and then I get an additional starter instead of just replacing my starter with a worse version?
Yeah, I would say at this point in the season, especially if like week 16, you know what your roster looks like, you're not trying to pick up Kendre Miller or somebody to start this week potentially, I would just be getting the handcuff. I would lock in that. We don't know exactly what Kenneth Gainwell's role will be based on the snaps he's seen this year compared to Will Shipley. Feel pretty confident that he would see double-digit touches in a game if Saquon was to miss in a good offense. The same thing for Tyler Algier if we feel even more confident about that. I'd be prioritizing that handcuff for week 17 just so my lineup, maybe the best player, probably some of these running backs are the best player in your team, isn't an absolute zero now moving forward and you don't have anybody to replace that. It might be easy to pick those guys up still if maybe people lock waivers in their league if guys are eliminated, but you just don't want to take that risk. I'd be trying to stash handcuffs at this point over, I don't know, we can scroll down to like wide receiver 50s on the week if that's Wan'Dale Robinson, Josh Palmer, Michael Wilson, like all these guys don't need to be on your roster. I would just have that security piece instead. And at this point, like guys like Kendre Miller, even Jerome Ford to some extent, like I don't think they're winning me my league if I pick them up. Maybe I'm not even starting them. Flex option, 9-10 fantasy points. I'd rather have the security of a sure thing fill in top 20 running back if my main guy was to go out.
Yeah, maybe the only logic to, hey, my roster is relatively set, but I still want to pick up a Jerome Ford or a Kendre Miller is to just kind of block your opponent from doing it if they have issues at running back. But yeah, I mean, at this point in the season, sorry, team morale. Again, cut those depth wide receivers. Doesn't really matter anymore. We bring in the backup running backs. Maybe if you're streaming defenses, if you do stream defenses, maybe that's a play at this point. You really want to make sure you're stashing your bench with upside.
Yeah, and it's obviously league specific. It's also if you're in a league with fab budget, and depending on your fab budget, like if you have the most left in the league, then you can take more risks and not stashing these guys a week prior because you can just get them if something was to happen heading into the championship. But if you're out of fab budget, don't have fab budget, you got to play it a little bit safer. I would handcuff these guys heading into week 17.
You just don't want to leave yourself exposed to not being able to grab Mike Boone off the waiver wire. That is a thing we are saying here in the year 2024. Sal, hell of a show. It's been a hell of a run all year long, man. Really appreciate it. You've been fantastic. A great addition to the weekly programming on the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. Could not say enough good things about working with you. And I mean, hey, again, a full breakdown on Mike Boone to end the show. What a way to do it.
Yeah, we just give the people what they want. It's been great, Matt. I appreciate you having me each and every week. Look forward to hopefully doing these more in the offseason and heading into next year.
Absolutely. I will probably be knocking on your door to potentially do some playoff previews if you're down for it as well. In the meantime, Sal, what can the people check out from you this week and just kind of down the stretch here at Yahoo?
Yeah, Wednesday, as you're listening to this, it'll already be out. The wide receiver best matchups on the week for week 16, making sure you're ready for your fantasy postseason. Thursday, the running back version, best matchups of that article will drop. And Friday will be the key findings. It'll be a very similar schedule heading into week 17. Week 18, we'll have some pieces going out as well, kind of wrapping up the entire year in some of the segments we've been writing each week. So content still going out all the way through the fantasy regular season.
Boom. Love to see it. Make sure you're checking all of that out from Sal. It's going to be a must-read, must-consume content for you to win your leagues. In the meantime, that is going to do it for this show today. On Thursday, we're going to have the final fantasy film room of the season with Nate Tice. We're going to try to predict some of the biggest dynasty debates that are going to happen in the offseason. Maybe talk about some young players that we think have leveled up throughout the course of the season. That's going to help you definitely in the offseason. It's going to definitely help you in these last few weeks of the regular season as well. Until then, we are out.